The sun bled into the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across the stone floor of the courtyard. The father pushed through the heavy wooden gate, his breathing heavy from the walk back from the marketplace. He stopped in the center of the yard, his hands trembling slightly as he lowered the small, bleeding kid to the ground. He had paid 2 zuzim for this creature, a fair price for a life he intended to nurture. He checked the knots on the tether, pulling them tight against the iron ring set into the wall. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, leaving the small creature in the deepening dark, unaware that the cycle of history was already beginning to turn. The shadows near the wall detached themselves from the stone. The stray cat, lean and scarred, moved with liquid silence toward the center of the courtyard. It did not hesitate. It launched itself in a blur of fur, teeth, and claws. The kid had no time to bleat, no time to retreat. The cat struck with calculated precision, its weight pinning the smaller creature to the earth. The struggle was brief, brutal, and absolute. The cat stood over its prize, ears flattened, eyes scanning the perimeter for threats. It did not notice the low, guttural growl vibrating from the corner. Fierce hiss arched back, dog lunged, jaws snapped air. Sharp barks split the hush. Coiled dog guards its kill. A passerby, drawn by the cacophony, burst through the gate. He saw the dog, teeth locked and snarling, and reached for the first thing his hand found against the wall, a heavy, weathered wooden stick. The dog scrambled backward, retreating into the shadows, while the man dropped the stick in the center of the yard. It landed heavily, skidding across the stones until it came to rest against a stack of dry, brittle brush piled for the winter. A stray spark, shaken loose from the friction of the struggle, drifted down onto the tinder. It glowed, a tiny, pulsing red eye in the dark. Then, the dry twigs caught. A thin line of smoke curled upward, followed by a sudden, hungry crackle. The flames licked at the wood, climbing the length of the discarded stick in seconds. The fire roared to life, casting long, dancing shadows that flickered against the courtyard walls. The heat intensified, turning the air dry and sharp. The stick, once a tool of order, was now the fuel for a growing inferno. It curled and blackened, its fibers turning to ash as the blaze spread. The stone masonry, weakened by the intense heat, fractured with a sound like a gunshot. A massive, sudden deluge erupted from the breach, a wall of cold water crashing across the courtyard floor. The reaction was instantaneous. The fire did not merely fade, it shrieked. A thick, white cloud of steam billowed upward, blinding and scalding, as the water swamped the embers and turned the raging inferno into a hissing bed of black sludge. From the darkness of the open gate, a heavy, rhythmic thudding approached. An ox, massive and indifferent to the wreckage, lumbered into the center of the yard. It lowered its head, nostrils flaring, and began to lap at the deep, murky pools of water left by the flood. The animal drank with slow, deliberate gulps, its presence dominating the space. The ox raised its head, water dripping from its muzzle, and let out a low, guttural breath that echoed against the damp walls. It turned slowly, its massive frame blocking the center of the yard, unaware of the figure emerging from the gate. In his hand, a heavy blade caught the moonlight, reflecting a cold, sharp gleam that cut through the lingering steam. The blade descended in a single fluid arc, precise and final. The ox collapsed, its weight hitting the stone floor with a dull, heavy thud. The slaughterer stood over the fallen creature, his breathing controlled. He remained perfectly still as the moonlight illuminated the dark, spreading pool on the stones. The slaughterer remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the fallen ox. He did not hear the approach. The air in the courtyard began to crystallize, a sudden frost forming on the stone tiles where the blood had pooled. From the deepest corner of the wall, a shadow detached itself, growing tall and thin, stretching across the ground until it eclipsed the moonlight. The man turned, his grip tightening on the hilt of his weapon. He swung the blade in a desperate, wide arc, but the steel passed through nothing but freezing mist. The shadow did not recoil. It glided forward, a silent presence that seemed to swallow the very light of the night. The angel of death stood before him, a figure of absolute stillness. With a single slow gesture, A hand reached out, not touching him, yet the life drained from the man in an instant. His eyes went wide, reflecting the void before him, and he collapsed beside the ox. The courtyard was now a graveyard of the cycle, held in the grip of a cold, unyielding finality. The stillness in the courtyard was absolute, a heavy shroud cast by the presence of the Angel of Death. The air remained frozen, locked in the grip of the shadow that hovered over the fallen. Then, the sky above the courtyard walls began to tear open. It was not a sound, but a vibration that rattled the very foundations of the earth. A sliver of white light appeared, thin as a needle, then widened into a blinding golden radiance that poured down like liquid fire. The stone walls groaned, cracks spiderwebbing across the masonry as the courtyard could no longer contain the magnitude of the descent. The Holy One descended, not as a figure, but as a force of pure, transformative justice. The light reached every corner, but the light did not strike. It simply existed, and in its presence, the darkness could not endure. The angel's form began to fray at the edges. The angel of death did not scream. It simply ceased to be. The darkness that had defined the night dissolved, leaving behind a space that felt strangely hollow. As the light grew stronger, the courtyard became a sanctuary, a place where the memory of the night served only to deepen the value of the peace that followed. As you can understand from this fable, anyone taking vengeance at his hand will fit into a vicious circle. By retrieving, you acknowledge that God is the only judge.